Thank you.
How many counselors does it take to plug in a microphone? Three counselors. We've determined it takes three.
But then it's staff that really does it. So.
Yeah.
3 counselors and a city recorder.
All right, we should have mics on now. So, council, any questions on agenda or consent items for tonight?
Oops.
Seeing none. Special concerns? Finally got almost all that striping done. Weather's going down to 2.
Say it again, Mayor.
Say, finally got all the striping done, I think, on Wilsonville Road.
The crooked part, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. All right, why don't we jump into our work session items then, starting with our art interpretive information, if we could.
Oh. Shoot. I don't know. That's a good question.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Is this working? I'm Zoe Monahan, Assistant to the City Manager, and this evening with me is Jamie Taylor, our GIS intern. This evening we'll be sharing a new map tool featuring publicly owned art. The City Council set a goal earlier this year to inventory all public art with interpretive recognition. The publicly owned art was inventoried and the vacant pads for future art were identified. Our GIS team was able to incorporate the publicly owned art interpretive map tool into our annual GIS internship program. The map tool will provide a resource for community members to learn about the publicly owned art in Wilsonville. Jamie's going to walk through the map tool and we welcome any feedback and questions after her presentation.
All right, good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Again, I'm Jamie Taylor and I'm the GIS intern and I'm pleased to present the publicly owned art story map tour. So the story map format may look familiar as it has been used to present the Planning Department's annual housing report. This virtual tour features Wilsonville's publicly owned art through images and interactive maps. You can experience the tour at your own pace just by scrolling through, and you're able to jump forward and backward using the side navigation bar. You can see the titles of the different slides that we'll be seeing. Each of the images on the ribbon opens up to show a larger version of the image. So even though it looks small, they're able to open. And the main stage features an interactive map with blue pins, which feature the artwork within Wilsonville. And you see a pop-up image that will be a preview. The pink pins are vacant spots, available spaces for future artwork installations. You're able to zoom in or out. Sorry, that was a little quick. You're able to move the map. And as a layout, we have 3 main sections in the tour: Town Center Park, the Wilsonville Public Library, and Wilsonville Transit Center, with some installations in between. And it's organized with the intent that someone could use this as a walking guide or get a rich virtual experience from their computer or mobile devices. All right, we'll start at Town Center Park. And each section has an interactive map to get a close-up, and then it transitions into images of the featured artwork and a little bit of information. So the main part will be changing. We also feature the address or the closest intersection for navigation purposes. And we'll go ahead and start the tour right by the Parks and Rec admin building, and that is Apache. So that's our first stop and a very familiar site at Town Center Park. Next, we have Friendship, and this commemorates the 10-year anniversary of our sister city relationship with Kitakata. Guardian, which stands watch over the park and the Oregon Korean War Memorial. And just steps away, we have the Oregon Korean War Memorial. And the granite wall is a total of 109 feet long, so very impressive. And luckily, I got a lovely shot of a wreath the other day while out walking. And our last piece in the Town Center Park is the familiar image of General Douglas MacArthur. And so we'll move on to a slide about City Hall, because we do have publicly owned art within City Hall, including a rotating gallery on the first floor and the familiar tile mural commemorating the Beauty and the Bridge project in council chambers. We encourage the public to access these during business hours, of course. And then we move on to the Wilsonville Public Library and Reinvention, which is, believe it or not, designed to rotate. I'm not sure if anybody has taken an opportunity. The next one is Flight of the Moon, the familiar butterfly sculpture with orange glass and a beautiful heart detail. And then a little lesser known one just south on Rebecca Street is Modern Flight, another flight-themed metal sculpture. And lastly, we have the Peace Pole, which was donated by the Wilsonville Rotary Club. And we call attention to the over 70 pieces of art within the public library. And there's a link encouraging folks that are using this to take a look and inquire further, particularly about Intarsha, which is a beautiful piece. And then we go over to Beauty and the Bridge. And so another map has popped up for folks that need to be oriented. And we have more lovely pictures, and we encourage folks to take a look at the website to learn more about the project and have an up-close look. The next main section is Wilsonville Transit Center. And we have a preview of all the different pieces of art there. And the clock tower. And it's actually a great time of year to see the tower illuminated with our shorter daylight hours. So that's something that is definitely worth taking a look at. The bus shelters, there's lots of artistic detail on just these functional structures, the beautiful fused glass, as well as small little insect details in metal. We also have the accent panels, which illuminate as well, and they're designed to accompany the clock tower as a pair. And I'm sure folks are very familiar with Let's Dance, also called the Mermaid, but it's a stunning piece featuring a graceful dancer. And the last one at Wilsonville Transit Center is the Wilsonville Interactivator. So this is actually one of a series of interactivators which are located at each of the west stations. And so these are unique pieces. Sorry, as I roll too fast. But each of the heads and each of the tables are unique. So very unique and whimsical. And then there is El Viento, which is not far from the transit center. It's just outside the Smart Admin office. That is, El Viento means the wind. So it features some scenes from Wilsonville history and local tourism. And then we have one more piece of transportation themed art, which is the art on the move. And so we have most of the publicly owned artwork in this tour has a location on the map, but the buses are on move. So we featured a slide about the presentation to council in December and a bit about Smart Transit's commitment to collaborating with local student artists. There's a call to take a look at their website about that. And a familiar sight on Beckman Road is the stylized horsetails. It's best appreciated up close on foot, and it's a wonderful piece of the landscape. And then our last slide is a call back to the main map where you're able to revisit any artwork featured on the tour. And also we encourage folks to engage with Let's Talk Wilsonville and hopefully get some further discussion and feedback. And that is the end of my story map tour presentation. Thank you very much.
Councilor Lehan.
Oh, you thought I wanted to talk. Okay, I do. We have three major, I would consider them artworks, which are the Marassi water features. Bob Marassi is internationally known artist, sculptor, and landscape architect. And it's huge that we have three of them. I mean, it seems like somehow we need to in here say these Marassi features, the one at Town Center, the one at the water treatment plant, and the one at Marassi, which carries his name, needs to be, we should include those on the list.
Publicly owned artwork, yeah.
Publicly owned artwork. And then other categories where that aren't city-owned but publicly owned would be the artwork at Graham Oaks, that acorn, and and some of their other structures. That Bird Blind is one. I can't remember, I haven't walked around there in a while, but they have several in Graham Oaks. And then we should think about the schools as well, because I think some of the schools have art on their, integrated in there, or art-like things integrated in their playgrounds or their buildings that would qualify also. And I know we don't have, I mean, it's not public exactly, not public property, but the old church, that is, isn't his name David Glicker? Am I getting that wrong?
For who?
The guy who did the windows. The windows are done by a really famous window designer from Portland. I think his name is David Glicker, but it's something like that. If that isn't it, it's something like that. But he's well-known also, and those are, he designed all those those windows with the crystals are a significant piece of art. Just top of mind.
Yeah, this initial one is just artwork that's city-owned on city facilities. So expanding that into the future is certainly something we can do as we add additional pieces that are,
Yeah.
I think the one in,
So those are-
you mentioned Graham Oaks Metro facility. So
Right.
we can
That
certainly
acorn that you can
expand that.
climb on.
Yeah. This is just the initial kind of city-owned inventory.
Yeah, but it should include the Marassi features.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
So is it our intent that art that is there for the enjoyment of the public that is on private property would not be included in this?
No, but the initial kind of task was inventory and get
Yeah.
this up that's city-owned. So notwithstanding the Marassi Town Center and Water Treatment Facility, which has their own. And Chris Namsu has a bunch of really good information on those three facilities that I don't know if you gave me your,
Well, we have a whole
he has a
pamphlet.
whole back history of what the
But
architecture
We had one
means.
produced, a
Yeah.
pamphlet
Yes.
about those three.
So you don't have to recreate the wheel on that. We can give you that
Right.
information.
So I'm thinking about other public installations. Right up the street here at Clackamas Community College is a major welded metal
Clackamas
structure
Community College.
outside that building. It's on the community college. At Argyle Square, at the main intersection, there's a dancer's piece that is also public. Over at the former Lowry's
Lowry's.
Center, there along the public sidewalk. I don't know if it's actually on the private side or on the public side.
The family one.
Well, I will stipulate that there's a lot of artwork out there that's not owned by the city that we could definitely inventory, but that wasn't the task of this one.
So if our intent is that people have access to the information and can go see all the different installations, I would favor that we include those that are maybe not publicly owned but are available to the public by intent in our map, our
It's a-
guide, or.
Yeah.
Isn't the Lowry one a right-of-way? It's in
I
public-
I
it's in the
thought it
public
was on the
right-of-way.
right of way.
It's not owned by the city.
It's not owned by the
It's
city.
not owned by the city, but it's in the right-of-way.
There's a whole list of additional things that we can add to this down the road. Absolutely.
Right.
But initially, we will add the three parks that Mr. Marassi designed,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's good.
And then we can continue to add things that are not city-owned
Yeah.
as we progress.
All right.
As we
so-
have more interns to help us inventory.
Right. Councilor Ackerman.
I thought that this looked very nice, and I'm glad to hear that that it works on cell phones, or, because I think, when you're walking around, that's going to be the device that you're using more, maybe. I was curious about the pink dots, because you said those were spaces that are available, so what happens? Can you click on a pink dot? So you can see
Yeah, I'll go
what
ahead and do
that's
that right
like?
now.
Does it like show you?
It just says available space.
So what are those? Are they like a cement pad that we have that's just not?
So it's cement with a metal plate for mounting.
Okay.
We used to have a rotating public art, and so that was one of the
remnants
pads.
of those-
Right.
Okay, I was curious what that part was.
And they could be used for future public art.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, because it would already be outfitted with kind of the infrastructure,
Hey.
the physical.
We lost
Oh,
And then the intent would be that if there were future public art pieces in these available spaces, that we would then update the dot.
Yeah.
The pink dot would become blue, and we would provide that interpretive information.
Okay.
So the neat thing about this tool is it allows it to be something that we can update over time. If we learn something's inaccurate, we can update it and make it correct. And it also allows us to add future public art easily when if new art were to come online. that's
Exactly,
publicly
and
owned.
expand it, as we've been talking
Yes.
about. One other thought that came to mind is the new signs that, are those up now? The
Interpretive panels?
Yeah, the interpretive panels? No, they're not up, but they're on their way or something, right? I wondered if.
Something like that.
Okay, well, but in time, if that would also, because those had some great kind of historical information about why it came to be and the significance of what was included in the designs.
But they do have
and
the
stuff.
Beauty and the Bridge.
Right, they have that, but
it
I
would
just
be
thought
part-
that.
it would be part of
Exactly.
creating the
All of a sudden, that's like one of the slide images would be of the panels or something like
Well, and the
that.
interpretive panels have a QR code on them, so
Uh-huh.
they will also link back to that Beauty and the Bridge webpage, where we can, again, provide additional information over time, update pictures, any of those things with
Okay.
time. So they'll link to the same location for additional information.
Okay, yeah, great, thanks.
And is there, in the town square in Villebois, there, which is public
Oh, yeah.
space, I mean, I'm not sure quite the status. There's historical, honoring the history of the,
Damaged, but there's
Damaged, but there's-
those little head things also.
Oh, the
Yeah.
You put your
masks.
head in them.
The masks.
yeah, so is that public?
It's,
Is that in one of the
I
regional
think
parks?
it's, I think it's
No,
Village.
In the
the
town
piazza.
It's in the
center.
piazza.
Yeah,
Private
Private park.
But again,
yeah.
if
public-
it's of
public-
interest to the
yeah.
general public,
Yeah.
we can certainly expand this, but the initial task was.
Well,
just-
so it's a great start. I think that you can tell from the dialogue, there's interest in
Expanding. Yeah, we can
pushing
see.
it beyond.
Absolutely.
Beyond the first iteration. And so I think there's lots that we can do there. I'm trying to remember the name of the man that passed away, Steve, that did the Steve Spicer, that was so adamant about trying to get more pads placed. And when Spicer was involved in this, we had talk about, oh yeah, we could put another pad here and another pad there and another. So the fact that we've got some vacant pads does not mean that those are the only places we might eventually
No.
want to expand art to, but it would take a robust kind of a program and
Part
people.
of that art tourism.
Right, right.
Stuff that we've been working on.
Yeah.
And don't forget the Gentle Ben in Maury's Landing, right?
Right.
That was temporarily relocated to
Relocated.
Sherwood
It's
for
back
a
home,
week.
yeah.
It's back home.
Again, but not a public park.
No,
Yeah.
but it's something that we could add
Yeah.
Good.
Councilor West?
if it's of interest to the public.
But
No,
Now-
in the future.
the difference is that Maury's Landing has a sign that says that this park is for the use of Maury's Landing residents only.
Oh,
So
so you can't
you
go
are.
up and touch the bear.
No, you can't even go close and take a selfie. No.
Okay. Fair enough.
Or not? Yeah.
I think this is brilliant. One thought, and it's more historic, but the barn is, to me, kind of a piece of art in its own right, and that's city-owned. So I don't know if that would be appropriate.
He's talking about the Steinbuscher.
Yeah, down at Brazzy Park, right, that same area down there, is really beautiful and a neat piece, and the people don't walk that deep back in the park, they may not even know it's there, so that's an option. And I think it would be maybe interesting to expand the visibility of wall-hanging art. I'm assuming a lot of it's local, and we have a lot of amazing local artists, and maybe having within the library a separate gallery drop down and people can image, learn a little bit about the piece, and more people will probably get a chance to appreciate the art if they can just have access to it, like if maybe they don't go, or maybe they're not available to go during library hours as often, or that pieces rotate, but just have an ability to see even things that aren't on display right now, but we can display them, but they're always on display because they're on the website, I think would be really great. And then I like the little blurbs about the artist, because what makes you appreciate art is not necessarily you look at a circle with a hole in it and you're like, that's a circle with a hole in it. But when you know that that circle and hole has this meaning behind it, and this artist and this thought process and this that it came from this type of like genre of art, and this is why it matters in the bigger scheme of art, really brings perspective beyond just something that you may or may not understand, so you get the chance to understand it. So I like how interactive and learning this website is. I think that though maybe it could be a little more robust if you had that piece for the pieces hanging here in City Hall, the places in the library, maybe the places hanging in the water that nobody gets a chance to look at, we'll get to look at them more that way. Would be kind of a neat way to do it. I know I'd look at it, so that's all I have.
So, go ahead.
Well,
Councilor.
my other comment on this is we seem to be developing a number of these kind of things, whether they're actual brochure map or they're a virtual one that you're going to follow on your phone. And I have some of them that I keep on display in my, vacation rental for people. All the Wilsonville walks, we have like 5 Wilsonville walks or bike routes or something like that, little brochures. The Historical Society is working on a history walk with history things, which is where the Stein-Bouger barn should be, along with a number of other historic structures. And then the other one are our increasing number of heritage trees. So it just seems like we need to think of this as a more global level, so that they at least look coordinated. Because right now they don't really. They aren't even all the same size when I put them in the brochure holder. They're not all the same size. The bike one with the walk one, and they're different graphics, and so along with getting our signage coordinated, it would be in our lovely logo and all that stuff, it would be nice to have our material for these tours or walks or whatever features there, think of it in a more global thing, so that we can have these and these and these, whatever those are, so that they're not just random different things. And some of them go together more than others. I know at the state level, we combine the historic markers with the heritage trees. That's all in one brochure. So maybe it's not all one thing, but maybe it's 2 different things or 3 different things. But we should think about it on a holistic level, I think, for what we're going to do, or what our goal is in the end, to have this many different.
So how does this all relate to the survey that the city provided a grant for the art background, and how do next steps going forward relate to that?
Are you talking about the plan that Mark is working to finalize, the arts culture stuff?
Yeah.
Well, that would identify opportunities for expansion of the program, and for some of the stuff that Councilor Lehan's been talking about, which is a more coordinated kind of approach to all these things that we've been working on. Right now, it's kind of left to the devices of each group that's, involved in these activities. So there is no uniformity
And
per
the
se.
Parks Department does a lot of these.
Right.
Puts out a lot of these things. Is this part of the Parks Department, or is this
Some of the brochures and stuff have been funded through city grants, so we could certainly put some requirements that have to have a particular look and stuff like that. So, that's more of a long-term thing, but I think.
And the underlying maps should be coordinated.
Yes.
So that.
The virtual tours should have a kind of a familiar kind of
Yeah,
look
it'd
to
be
them.
nice if you could, like this, nothing wrong with this one as it is, but it would be nice eventually, if it's a virtual thing, that you could click on, now I'd like to see the historic things, and then the
Not
different.
different layer.
Right, yeah, kind of like
layers, and
GIS
then
database.
yeah,
You're
then
familiar with that, right?
The orange
It's
ones
right up your
would all
wheelhouse, right?
pop up instead of the purple ones, and you'd know, you could see if there's one really close to the one I'm already looking at, I'd like
When you
to
go
look
see
at that
the
one too.
tree. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Councilor West.
Another great idea is when we go to museums, every time we travel, we're always in a museum somewhere. So like if I wanted to go to the Nelson in Kansas City, but I wanted to see what it was like before I got there, or the Kimber in Dallas, I could, or the Kimball, I could walk I could just go on and you could take a quick virtual tour like you would in a house from a real estate, and you can say, okay, we'll take a virtual tour and see the art hanging in the library, and maybe there's a section in there that's just, I don't know, but maybe it's dedicated towards Native American Oregon art specifically and has a cultural specific reference to that art, and then having information on that and making it maybe a virtual tour through this would be a really cool idea too. So instead of just like a gallery that might be see it hanging on the wall in the real place, it might make you more likely to visit the library or do things like that too.
We got lots of plans for you.
Yeah.
So many ideas.
Great idea.
There you go.
And possibly a job, it sounds like. All right, thank you.
All right, sounds good. Any other?
Just next steps for you. So we'll incorporate the suggested changes for city-owned art into this and hopefully have a page ready to go that's public by the end of the year, and then we'll advertise it in the Boones Ferry Messenger hopefully in January. So that's our plan at this point. And then, of course, there's opportunity to expand this in the future as we have the capacity to do so.
And we'll add the 3 city parks as
Yes.
their own art experience.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the
you.
nice work. Telluride, not Daughters of American Revolution.
No, sir.
You and your acronyms here.
We have several acronyms in transit. Good evening, Mayor, Council. I'm Eric Loomis, the Transit Operations Manager for SMART. And with me, I have the Chair of the Telluride Steering Committee, Kate Johnson. As well as in the audience, I'd like to point out a few of the members and friends of the committee. We have Mike Malchow-Hay, Priscilla Johnson, Rob Wiesenthal, Donna Atkinson, and Edna Boudrias with us this evening as well in support of the recommendations we're going to go over tonight. So let me get that.
Hold on, Eric.
Ah, got there. Okay, thanks. So I'll start as we're getting the presentation going here. So the committee has met over the last 12 months, once a month to kind of understand what SMART does for their demand response programs, to go over grants and finance, how the programs are paid for, and then a robust public outreach session to get survey results from the public from the respective areas that the committee represented, and then to analyze those results and make recommendations based off of the information they found through SMART and through the survey results. So next I'll just hand it over to Kate to discuss kind of what the committee's done over the last year and the recommendations they have.
Great. Good evening, Mayor and Council. So as Eric was saying, we met on several occasions, and as far as goal setting, the committee was very engaged. There were about 20 altogether of us, and some of the topics for discussion were for future meetings, the Telluride operations inefficiencies, for example, like scheduling shuttles, exploring the supplemental services, equality up there, that wasn't on our paper, but funding opportunities and communications and awareness. The equality part was the ensuring services prioritize serving those that most need it in the community, and that was sort of taken from our surveys and whatnot. And so how we reached our goals, as Eric was saying, was through these surveys and discussions. And then, do you want to go to the next slide? So here's what you see as a result of our outreach and surveys. Top destination, of course, so we reached about over 157 collected. Medical services came at number 1, and shopping, number 2, recreation, friends, movies, etc., work. We have service hours mid-morning to afternoon, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. The most interest was in between Tuesday and Wednesday. It was in Tuesday and Wednesday. Out of town service valued at a higher price point. People are willing to make 20 minutes or more for pickup as to group rides. And interestingly enough, our demographic is split in between 81% of the respondents were 65 and over, 18% of the respondents were between 30 and 65. Any questions on this? We'll go to the next slide. As far as recommendations, the committee would like the city council to endorse the following. Maintain programs and services that have proven successful. The committee also proposes smart staff implement the list of recommendations when expanding services and by integrating them into future master plans that would receive formal approval by city council. So immediate changes that staff could take would be improvements that can happen within the current plans and available funding. So things such as the minor policy recommendations, the customer window wait times, simplify the application process that came up quite a bit, increase awareness of the Dial-A-Ride program, and then finally coordination with the resident facilities.
Yeah, and so we had the list of recommendations in the council packet. What we didn't have there that you received tonight were the full list of questions that the committee came up with for the survey. And we'll open it up to any questions you have about the survey or the committee recommendations.
Okay, thank you. So your recommendations are grouped into maintain items and improve items, and then you have some additional pieces that was in the staff report. Council, any particular questions? Councilor Ackervall.
I wondered, and you touched on it briefly just now, in that improve section, one of the items is to simplify the application process. And when I was reading the packet, I was curious about that, and I thought, I don't know that much about what the application process is. And so but one thing that we hear in a larger global, I guess, view is that sometimes people that need assistance, one of the greatest obstacles is trying to work through the system to get that assistance. And so I'm curious if you could share a little bit about some details on that, what the process is, where the frustration points are, or what potential ideas might be.
He's on the receiving end, but I know on the application.
Absolutely, yeah. I can explain both the issues we ran into and then some feedback we got from the committee, and anyone can speak up if they so choose. But one piece is the delivery of the applications to us. Right now, we only have by snail mail, basically, because of the health information that's in there, HIPAA laws and everything.
Okay.
We don't ask for emails or even faxes at this point. We have in the past, but we've moved away from it because of those unsecure.
So it has to be a secure transfer of data.
Correct. So
Okay.
Right now we're looking at, so that's one piece of it, is how can we make it easier for customers to get their information to us? And then the other piece is the application currently is about 5 pages long, so we're trying to make that smaller and simplify it for our customers, and only do what we have to required by ADA law to get that particular information to us.
That is a big frustration.
Is the length.
The length and just the cumbersome of, it's overwhelming. I don't know where
Yeah.
to start.
Yeah.
I need help.
Yeah.
Along that note, can we offer them, have we thought about offering them prepaid postage to just maybe make it that much easier to send in an application? And is there somebody at the city that can help them if they ask for help? Is there a resource for help for somebody to walk through it? And per HIPAA laws in healthcare, we often fax and only mail unless it's secured. So I don't know if fax is an option, if there's a fax in a secure office that we could have something faxed into. Maybe that would help them. Or if they cannot write, can they fill it out like a Word document that allows them to type in the information, and then they can print it and bring it in with the signature?
I would agree with that. If there's some kind of way to facilitate, kind of like a DocuSign, like someone's there.
Like a
on
DocuSign,
template.
yeah.
Yeah, and we've worked with some of those different, we've had an online fillable form, again, it went to an email that we moved away from. So we have those tools available, but listening to the committee, these things are our priority, so we do want to move back to those and see what we can do to make it easy.
That's great. Thanks.
Right now, it's most of the committee members, and I would urge them to speak. I don't want to speak necessarily on their behalf, but I would say a large majority of them like to be on the phone to take the interview. Well, can't you just write this down as I'm telling you? To them, that's the connection. Would you agree?
Yeah, sure. And to further answer your question, Counselor, is we do have our dispatchers as a resource. If someone calls in and wants help over the phone, we do that. We also have a travel trainer with a partnership with Ride Connection that can go out to people's house and help them fill out applications.
And along that lines, the key often to healthcare access, which is for me like what I've always, when we've talked about since the beginning, is you have to remove every possible barrier. You just, I mean, if it's a barrier, we have to streamline and make it easier. And for the healthcare piece, I know that you mentioned that. Did you guys have, like, can you expand on the improving of access to medical rides? Are there other can we, I know that.
You want to hit that one?
Expanding medical rights? Is that?
Yeah, specifically for medically fragile, those in need that need to get access to care.
Yeah, so one of the items in the improved area are the pickup windows. So within our current plan, that is something that can really help us as staff. If we widen our windows, which right now, if someone wants to ride at 9 o'clock, we are there at 9 o'clock, versus if we have a 15, 20-minute window, we can group more rides together, making it more efficient. And so we can increase our capacity of ridership that way. So that's one thing we could do immediately without adding funding into the programs. So that's something we'll work towards.
Okay.
We're also adding, not to talk about medical, but like on Sundays, we didn't know if you wanted to mention that too. There's been some ask for having rides on weekends more frequent, like people going to church, people wanting to go on a different excursion. That's been discussed, and Eric said there's potential there where we won't have to seek extra funding, but we can actually add that based on the demand. If we have enough people, going in that direction on Sunday.
Are those that are 18%, almost 20% still a chunk of people, they're younger, but do they have another demographic piece that sets them apart for the need of this service? Do they tend to be a more disabled population, or another thing that needs them to have access to this type of service that kind of, because the vast majority are seniors over the age of 65, but is there any other unifying or something that kind of makes it like we're serving this age group, but there's this piece of information too that makes them all similar?
It's a good question. It's hard when you've got the surveys. You've got 157, you've got 26,000. Could we miss a certain amount that didn't fill out those surveys? Sure. We don't have the crystal ball with that, but I would.
So and I might add to that. So looking at the age group, obviously the majority were 65 plus. So we do offer, part of our programs is ADA, and that's any age group, and then general public as well. For the general public, we usually encourage them to take fixed route if it's available in their area. If it's not, then that's kind of what the dial ride is for. It is restricted on scheduling because our priority is our ADA customers, our 60 plus, but it is available. It's just not as widely used because fixed route is usually close by.
Yep.
Thank you.
So a few years ago, when we were working on our master plans, there was quite a bit of discussion about whether there were ways to run the dial ride more efficiently by taking more people on, a route or a time frame, so that you could serve several people. And you kind of alluded to that, about being able to provide broader service to more people. I don't see that as an inherent piece within what's being recommended here. So I'm curious how we got from that prior discussion to this discussion without talking about that piece.
I would see that as more of a staff situation versus this committee was focused on what they could do to expand the dialer current programs or additional programs, where with staff, we look at ridership as it increases in a specific area or to a specific location. That's when we create look at creating a shuttle to those areas. For example, we just received some STIF discretionary funding for a shuttle to Meridian Hospital Park. And that was because we identified that as a high ridership area for our dial ride customers. It's similar to our Villebois shuttle and Charbonneau shuttle as well. Those were dial-a-ride systems that we created into shuttles. And so we would look at that as well throughout here. If
I think the mayor may be referencing something that came up a while ago, which is it would be more efficient if you could to move some people that are on dial-a-ride to a fixed route, because that would be more
absolutely.
efficient, right?
Yeah.
But the purpose of this was to figure out what's going well, what can you improve upon for the
Right.
dial-a-ride service.
Correct,
That's
yeah.
a separate and distinct issue than what the mayor's
Right.
talking about.
Yeah, and we constantly look at that, and that's what our travel trainer, that's what they encourage, is they train them on fixed route to get them off to
Right.
the response.
Correct. So it is being addressed, Mayor, but it's not part of what we're talking about here
Not
tonight.
the scope of this committee.
Okay, so what are next steps then? I say you're asking council to adopt this, but what are the processes that might fill in some of those other gaps before we say, yeah, this is,
Well, this is just to improve the dial-a-ride service.
Yeah, so.
We're always encouraging, and SMART is very in tune with wanting to optimize service and be innovative and be as efficient as they can with their resources. So that's kind of an ongoing cultural thing. So I don't think we need to provide any direction on that.
Well, as I said earlier, I had some recommendations. Would you like me to, those were some bullet points. You want me to
As
repeat?
part of the dial-a-ride stuff?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you like me to
Yeah,
say
sure.
that?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So minor policy recommendations, customer window wait times would be one recommendation. Simplify the application process. Increase awareness of dial-a-ride, the dial-a-ride program. There does seem to be a lot of misunderstanding, if you will, and then there's coordination with resident facilities. That's a big one too. Connecting, there's a lot of discussion around what it is and where you can apply for it and how to facilitate it and who to talk to, right? It's, you know, I live by Brookdale, I live by Wilsonville Springs, and those two it's like, do you put a brochure in the lobby or on the elevators? Is there a one point of contact that is the person that can talk in that particular facility? And then you have someone that lives at home that may or may not go to the community center. So that's just one example of a lot of different examples. If that makes sense.
Yeah, so thank you, Kate. And I think a big part of it is moving forward for next steps. There's two sides to it. One is what we can implement immediately within our budget, and then the other piece is some of the recommendations that we could implement in future master plans. The committee worked, obviously, themselves and with the public to find these recommendations for us, so we could implement those in future plans if we need additional funding for different programs, or move funding from other programs.
So stuff we can do right now with existing resources, we will do. Additional things we will consider, but it has to be part of an overall kind of discussion with the city council and budgetary impacts.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah, and
Yes.
That was my question.
and so these recommendations don't try to differentiate amongst those that you can do right now and those that will require some future funding structure.
Not the
before-
ones that she just addressed, because it sounded like some of that might be an expansion of service and/or might require some additional resources, right?
Right.
Yeah. So if you're going to do a full-on marketing plan for dial-a-ride to, gain more exposure, what would that look like? Will we sit down, will we send a staff person out to talk to all the different facilities that may access that service and, walk them through how they can maybe do intake, if that's possible, and on some of the stuff that you're talking about? So that would require quite a bit of staff.
Well, I'm almost wondering if it's even taking the survey, simplifying the survey is even a higher priority too, right?
Yeah. And I would think you would work with the committee to determine how that priority should fall out.
Yeah, and that's something, exactly, if it was that robust of what we were doing for marketing, we would do that. But things simple as having our marketing team and travel trainer go out and just emphasize that when they're talking to the public. That's something we could do right away, give them materials to do that.
And I'm assuming some of that's going on now.
It is to an extent, but
Right.
we would definitely
Could you expand it,
prioritize
and what would
that.
that look like? Right, okay.
So when we have these recommendations, you've got a list of bullet points for improvements. Increased capacity for out-of-town medical trips. That could mean a significant budgetary impact. And when you say accept these recommendations, I don't know, because I don't know about the budgetary impact. Availability of out-of-town service, same thing. Weekend service for Charbonneau, same thing.
So all you're doing by,
All of those things have other aspects than just being desirable.
right, so all you're doing by accepting this report is saying that these are things that we will look at. It's not saying that you approve of all of them, just that some of them are easy to do and won't require a lot of effort or additional resources, and some may require more, and we would come back to you at that point.
Right, so that's what I was asking about, next steps. What is that next step to try to determine what are going to be the things that can be done within the current structure on a relatively short time frame, and what are the steps that will require more analysis or more funding or more longer range planning, and
So we could do a follow-up presentation to council about that in terms of what we can do right now versus what we maybe could do in the future. And I would push that back to Eric and his group to figure out how that should.
Yeah, and so originally this was going to be, the committee was winding down. This was going to be, we can certainly meet again to, all staff will go through this, make those short-term and long-term differentiations, and we can certainly come back.
well, I'm just trying to understand what we're agreeing to or
Well, this is a report.
endorsing.
Okay, so what you're endorsing is these are the findings of this committee that the SMART has put together. And there's some options in there for considerations that you could do immediately. And there's some considerations that will take a little more effort and planning. So, the work is never done. If you accept this report, you're not saying that we're going to expand service to, Albany. Or anything like that. All we're saying is that here's some things that this group said that we
Or
could do.
Charbonneau, yeah.
Or Charbonneau, right. Yeah.
Yeah, they were looking for, to just endorse the recommendation, and staff would look, if there's any additional cost to a program or anything, that's when we would come back to council or put it in a formal document. And a master
But then you've got triage to do, because is that recommendation worth more and more important to do than some other recommendation that might be within this list of possibilities? And if there's limited budgetary, availability, do you do A or do you do B? Or how do you, those kinds of things are going to have to be weighed.
Absolutely, and I might point out to you, on the additional comments we have, let's see, research establishing an ongoing community-based committee for Smart Style Rides. So this committee was, the scope was for about a year project, but one of their recommendations was, this is a great program, the public needs to hear more about this, staff needs to hear more from the public, why isn't this ongoing? So that's something we'll definitely look at.
And that could help with the prioritization.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Question?
Councilor West?
So just to clarify, this is reminds me a little bit of goal setting on a very specific issue where we are saying, here's a basic framework of things that need to be addressed. So let's work on the framework and then parse out the details. But this is our recommendations through our research, not committing to any particular recommendation, but allowing us to basically have some type of vision that we are working towards.
Kind of a roadmap.
Am I understanding it? So if we say, yes, we endorse these recommendations, then we're saying we agree with your vision that your group came up with.
Right, it's
Yes.
like a roadmap.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what that's a good way to put it.
Councilor Lehan, did you have?
Well, mostly I was just going to say, I thought this was a really good comprehensive report, and much as, this is a lot more information than I've had on this before, and wanted to mostly express our appreciation to the committee, because this is a lot of work that went into this, the staff and the committee, so.
It's good engagement, it really, from everyone, all of them, just really.
Yeah, a big thank you to the committee. They were very involved and very active in this. They created the questions for the survey. They went out to the community and received feedback from the community through the survey. And laid out the recommendations.
No, that's excellent.
Yeah,
Good, thank you.
Excellent work.
Good work. Okay, thank you very much.
thank you.
Have a late add-on, Mayor.
Yes.
If you don't mind, I'm going to have Dan Carlson come up and give you an overview of some of the stuff that's, we had a big powwow here of about, 80 building official type folks here.
Correct.
Talking about some of the recent changes at the state legislature that Amanda has been working on with Dan in terms of codification. So he's going to give a brief overview of those efforts with Amanda.
All right. Good evening, Mayor Knapp. Good evening, Council. For the
Dan
record, I'm
Carlson.
Dan Carlson, the city's building official. It's all good. Just to give you a little bit of a primer as to what you have to look forward to over the next couple of council meetings. We have some very significant changes coming about from our state building code, and it has to do primarily with the scope of the code. Just to give you a bit of an overview, I'm going to try to cover the three buttons that you see on your right there, the state code adoption overview, what has changed, and what the timeline looks like. So locally, we adopt Wilsonville Code Chapter 9, and that is our administrative chapter, but it really supplements, it's intended previously to supplement the Building Code Chapter 1. Each of our building codes contains a Chapter 1, and its title is simply Administration. So as Brian mentioned, we had 80 of my peers from across the state, from Ashland to Medford to Portland, you name it, they were here. And we filled this room, figured that we could get 80 in here, so we did it. And basically, we were here because of, in my opinion, two words, and the two words are underlined for you at the bottom there, toward the bottom. And this is the statute, ORS 455-020, that directs the state Building Codes Division Administrator to adopt a statewide code. It has always been believed to be the intent of adopting a statewide code that it would apply to all buildings and all structures unless specifically exempted. And we have some of those. And you sort of read that in that first sentence there. But what we're doing, or what we're being directed to do, is to apply our codes only to those buildings where people are occupying them or using them. And so this creates quite a shift in what it does is, if I can just show you the two different versions of this is Chapter 1 of our code. So the 2014 version that we just went away from looks something like this. Let me try to zoom in on it a little bit better for you. And what we're concerned with is this scoping section here. You can see it's not super huge. It goes 101.1, and it has a box in it here, which is just what I showed you, ORS 455, and then gets into some appendix sections that are available for adoption. Well, then we go over here into the brand new 2019 code, and you can see we still have the same ORS box here, but then we have a lot of items that have been pulled out of the code that are items the state considers as not being humanly occupiable or impacting humans. So you can read down through there. There's a number of them sticking primarily on this side here, a number of them that would probably get your attention because we would not regulate these items. So fire safety during construction, being one. We really haven't had a nexus to regulate that in the building code, but the fire code, there have been some ability to get there. But just simply demolition, dangerous buildings, fences, retaining walls. So all of these things have been pulled out as reference from the state building code. They do us a wonderful favor, though, being a little sarcastic, and they give us the ability locally to enact local ordinances for most of those items. So what we have to do is we have to go through and figure out what items we need to adopt and don't need to adopt standards for, and adopt those standards. And so this code became effective October 1st, okay, statewide. We were given literally a couple of weeks notice that they were changing the administrative chapter of this code, which is this Chapter 1. When I say we, I mean the Oregon Building Officials Association. And so OBOA testified in opposition to these changes because they really impact, they have a dramatic potential to impact consistency statewide. So every jurisdiction is going to adopt different standards for these items. And the whole basis for having a statewide code is to encourage and promote consistency from one jurisdiction to the next. We're still trying to get at why we're doing this. Amanda has been very helpful in getting at the state AG's office and trying to come up with some rationale that we can then share with you as to why we're doing this. But this is the code that we have to work with. Now, I said October 1st was the adoption date. Because we did not actually get printed codes until middle of October in classic state style, they tell you we're going to have a code and they don't end up getting it published until the middle of the next month. We petitioned the state and they gave us until January 1st of 2020 to actually to have a bridge period. You could use either the brand new code, the 2019 version, or the old code, the 2014 version. Either one flies until January 1st. And at that point, we have to use the 2019 code. So that's kind of what we're wrestling with. It's a really tight timeline. The picture that I showed you of all the code officials here, we're all in the same boat. Every one of us are, and we had the state presenting at this meeting on Friday here, trying to field questions for how are we supposed to handle this, particularly and get something adopted in every state jurisdiction by January 1st. Very challenging. So we thought rather than hit you with all of this on, next week or next council meeting and the following council meeting, we just simply give you a heads up so you can be thinking about this. I've been instrumental in a task force, a statewide task force, to try to provide some guidance to my peers. We've put together some written guidance for them, just as we discover new things from the state to shepherd this along. So I'd be happy to answer questions with that, if I can.
Councilor Leon, yeah.
So where is the impetus coming from for this?
Yeah.
Who wants to do this? Who wants to make this change?
So it is being driven from the State Building Codes Division Administrator. His name is Mark Long, and he receives his counsel from a State Attorney General's office and a Deputy Attorney General in particular. So Amanda has reached out to that Deputy AG's office rep, and we've been dialoguing back and forth as recently as today and yesterday.
Well, what's the position of the home builders or other building construction people? Because, I used to work in code enforcement for City of Vancouver, but so I had just a minor amount of training in the Uniform Building Code, but the U is important in uniform. See,
yes, very
it's
important.
the same. So I can't imagine that they would that they wouldn't be being opposed by construction companies who have projects going on in multiple jurisdictions and don't want to be juggling what exactly is the code. Everybody's going to have a different code.
So in response, I have had 2 meetings. We meet every once a month. There's 2 of those, and there's one in the Mid-Valley Building Officials Group, and there's one in the Tri-County Building Officials Group. And so in September, October, November, we talked about this particular topic, and the home builders rep is there. And Roseanne, help me out here, Roseanne Nelson with the Home Builders Association. And her eyeballs are as big as mine. They're just, we didn't see this coming. It wasn't announced literally until a couple of weeks before this Chapter 1 was presented for rulemaking.
That's why I was asking where the impetus, if it's not coming from the construction side of things, from the builders, and it's not coming from the local jurisdictions, what's the point? Who would want to do that?
That's a great question.
And we really don't know the
We don't
answer
know
to
the
that?
What's the
answer to that.
rationale behind
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, what's the AG's office say?
They say that they can't share attorney-client communications with anybody else, that it's confidential. But basically, what we've gleaned from
Aren't we the
about 20
word for
building
us.
officials asking in various different ways, the representative, is those two words that Dan pointed to that have not changed in at least 18 years, because that's the last time the statute was amended, for some reason is getting a new interpretation from the state AG's office. There has been, we confirmed there's been no case law there's no case that's come up that's challenged this language, and that's why. So we don't know why that has changed. We have asked for, because there isn't anything official out, we have asked for a letter, an opinion letter, or the Building Codes Division also does put out code interpretation memos. So we've asked for either an opinion letter from the state AG's office or a code interpretation memo from BCD clarifying why this change is happening. And one of the confusing aspects of it is the way that the state is going around and talking about this. They talk about it from a policy perspective of adding flexibility, but then when you question about where this is coming from, they say it's based on an interpretation it's based on legal advice from their counsel.
No
So-
one wants that flexibility, though.
Can we
That's bad.
get the old council back that didn't do it?
Yeah.
Why is this all of a sudden an issue?
So and we've expressed to them, to the state, I mean, many of the building officials expressed to the state that this has ramifications because there are now aspects of the building code that are tied to what the state is requiring, and then there will be aspects that are ours. So when you look at appeals and fees, those are all impacted by this change. And we don't have an answer for exactly what that impact is yet. And I'm not sure we're going to get an answer.
So should
Chaos.
should the cities be talking about a legislative fix to this
Well,
in
yeah.
the short session in February? Should we be pushing collaboratively with League of
It's-
Cities?
it's-
Should we be?
Your
Yeah.
We have met,
lobbyist is sitting there waving at you.
well, we have met with one of our local reps and
Yes.
who happened to do a tour with, I don't know if you want to fill them in on that.
Sure. I had the opportunity to have Representative Neron with me to do a tour of the new Hilton, and it was, she and I have been appointed to a Governor's Fire Service Policy
That was my next
Council
question, yeah.
Task Force, the mouthful, and the idea is to look at fire safety during construction. What kinds of measures can be improved, if any? What kinds of local code provisions can be enacted, if any? And so we actually have another meeting this Thursday to continue our, that will be the third of our meetings. So she, during the tour, I mean, she was awesome at asking questions, at gleaning, what do fire sprinkler systems do, the rationale behind that, the differences between different fire caulking methods and, the fire extinguishers and standpipes and all those things that go into making a structure safe while it's under construction. And the Hilton was a great example of that, actually. So I've spoken to her briefly, but we're actually trying to set up a meeting with her in the coming weeks. This week is legislative week at the Capitol. So our lobbyist from OBOA is intending to meet with her and set up a time to flesh this out a little bit more.
Is there any legal recourse? I mean, just after 18 years of doing something a certain way, to unleash this kind of chaos, is there anything you could do from a legal side to challenge their interpretation, or are we pretty much stuck with what they say?
I mean, the problem is that the Building Codes Division is tasked with making these administrative rules. And so them changing their administrative rules based on an interpretation, I'm not sure how we would really get at.
But the rulemaking process requires you to do outreach to the people that are impacted by your decisions.
That's fair.
Did they make any outreach to hey, we're going to get rid of this whole list of things that are critical to, human life and safety. What do you think?
And everybody can do their own thing.
Right. Even though
like
this
the
is a
Wild
30-foot
West.
retaining wall, we're not going to require anybody to engineer it because we only care about the building. If the wall comes down, who cares? Right. It
The
doesn't make
fire
any sense.
safety issue, yeah.
Well, it's, and from a construction standpoint, it's,
Chaos.
they don't really care if you're required to put the fire extinguisher 40 inches from the floor or 43 inches from the floor, but they don't,
They want to know, yeah.
they just want to know,
Right.
they don't
Yeah.
care, they just, they don't want it to be different in Tualatin than it is in Oregon
Yeah.
City.
So this has a lot of significant ripple effects, and I just want to talk to you briefly about one, if I may. So just to give you an example to see how this plays out, I'm going to take something as simple as a fence, okay? If, for example, this goes away and the building division here in Wilsonville no longer issues permits for fences, we still have land use and zoning requirements for fences that would go unregulated. And so planning would then either have to adjust the planning code, or we would have to not regulate fences on a land use or zoning perspective. So there's some decision-making, some discussion that would have to occur. Do we then decide to issue a separate planning permit just for fences so that they can then be reviewed and looked at from a planning and zoning perspective? That's just one minutia of a ripple effect to this.
Can I ask a
It goes
question?
on- Sure.
So the big number 3, like, is glaring probably for all of us sitting here. And I spoke to Courtney last night about this council that you guys are on, this group, task
Right.
force with the governor. And so does this impact their ability to make sweeping decisions for fire safety under construction? Does this, like, in opposition, what the group is doing versus what this
No.
statute is? Is there any?
Puts it
No.
back at the local level. So you could have 21 different cities doing 21 different regulations for the building industry.
He literally drive 4 minutes or 3 minutes and be like,
This does a number of things. I'll just hit really quickly on. So it does, by pulling it out or emphasizing that it's pulled out of the state building code and emphasizing that you can adopt something locally, then it gives us the power. So that's a good thing, you know, or it could be. But to your question about Courtney and our Fire Service Policy Council and the discussions that are happening there, where we're at this point is looking at trying to insert some fire safety provisions for security fencing in particular, because that was the big
thing, yeah.
miss in our fire situation. And trying to do that at the state fire code level rather than the state building code level, because this is what we get at the state building code level. They want to back out of everything. Whereas we see a real need to actually regulate some of these important items and need to do that. So
we don't know why, though. It wasn't necessarily broken, but we, in someone's infinite wisdom, decided this was a good thing.
it's baffling.
So it sounds like somebody made an interpretation about some language that's been consistently applied for the last 18 years.
Was there any complaints about the previous language, or was this just like a random?
We don't
No,
know,
not
because they
that
won't
I'm
release
aware
the
of.
internal
Yeah.
memo.
Yeah, and
But don't they work
I
for us?
specifically asked, you know, generally when you see changes, it's because something happened, a
Right,
case
right.
happened, or, you know, something has happened, another statute has changed, you know, and their answer was,
Or
our-
industry
on
requested.
advice from legal counsel. And so then I said, so you're telling me no case, like nothing, no case has happened? No.
Is this a public records request type of thing, that you can figure it
Well,
out?
if they're claiming attorney-client privilege, you
Yeah,
good
the
luck getting
DOJ is
it.
pretty notorious for not disclosing, for not providing records that are theirs. So if it's one of if it's an attorney opinion, that's internal.
I do have a question about the legal aspect, since we haven't really talked about that.
Yeah.
Do we have any legal recourse would be something I would
Okay,
like to know.
yeah, we can look at that.
We always have legal recourse. I mean, there's two things that we can do immediately when there's a legislative fix. But the other is you can always sue.
Yeah.
And actually, I was out while a lot of this was happening on. I actually know Mark Long pretty well. Didn't know that that's where it was coming from, so I'll give him a call, see what I can find out maybe beyond that. But to me, it's something that the League of Oregon Cities should have
Right, absolutely, yeah.
had their eyes on,
An
and
AOC?
they
Yeah.
missed it somehow. And so that's where I would circle back to is legal counsel for League of Oregon Cities and say, hey,
Well, to be fair, I don't know if they weighed in or not. I think they were probably given the same lead time that we were
Yes.
given, right?
maybe,
I think
yeah.
Like a
that's
week.
accurate.
Yeah, but anyway, but that's one of their
Surprise.
jobs is to fight those kinds of battles that affect a lot of different cities as opposed to
Happy
the
holidays.
city.
Well, the
Wilsonville
counties, because
taking it
the counties and
Yeah.
the cities are.
Same.
Right.
Are the same on this.
And a lot of
You know,
counties
we
provide
contract
building
with,
services,
for
Yeah.
electrical out of the county and.
Yep.
I will,
And I think this week, the Association of Oregon Counties is having their annual meeting, and so I just talked to Stephen Madcore today, and I'll find out what happens there, so maybe
so
this
just
issue
so
will
you're
come up
aware,
there.
on the county side of things, Mark is playing out the flexibility angle. This is, for counties, they typically, most rural counties don't want regulation, you know, they don't have the density issues, and so the flexibility is appealing to them for having flexibility in their codes, you know, they'll choose, and I've had building officials like from Polk County and Marion County and others say, our commission is saying, we're only going to adopt what the state minimum is. Why would we adopt more stuff? And for us, where we have, you know, a lot of people and a lot of concerns with
Human life,
public safety.
Preservation of property, I don't know. I can think of a few.
So, you know, these are real issues. These are really important issues for us to have code to address. I also want to say that as part of the task force for the Oregon Building Officials Association to make recommendations, we did ask the state administrator, Mark Long, for an extension of at least 6 months till July 1st so that we could all figure this out. And that extension was denied. So,
So in like less than 2 months, like a month and a half or a month.
We've got 40 days left.
40 days
Yeah.
to like address.
Could we
So
pursue
items?
illegal? I mean, with other cities, in LLC, I would sure would be.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's something we can look at, but to your point, the reality is that we have to have a staff report and materials ready tomorrow for your guys' next council meeting.
Right.
So,
Well, it could be as simple as taking everything that was removed and putting it in as a local ordinance. I mean,
I think, and Dan, if I misspeak, please clarify. If you look back at that 2014 code, those provisions, because they don't specifically call out, now they're specifically calling out. So we actually have to find like a fence regulation that we want to adopt. We can't just say fences are regulated, right? So that's the hard part, is what do we want to regulate and what are the regulations we're actually creating? So what Dan and I have brainstormed to do is Chapter 9 has generally been a sore subject for Dan. He's wanted some revisions done to it, but just it's not been a high priority. So what we've talked about doing is kind of cleaning up Chapter 9 and actually referencing that all of the specialty codes, the building specialty codes, will be adopted by resolution, reference that in the code. That'll give us some flexibility to, if we adopt them by resolution, to change. And because they're updated every 3 years anyway by the state, it makes it so we don't have to come back and do code amendments every time. So I think, so that'll give us, if we can do the code amendments starting in the first meeting in December, we'll then have a little bit of time, i.e. 2 weeks, to get those regulations in for resolutions
That's insane.
the second meeting of December.
That's kind of still insane.
Yeah, it is. And it also means that if changes happen, or, hey, the state kind of reverses course, then we only have to do a resolution to fix those things. Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense, but certainly it's going to be a challenge.
is.
I just would emphasize that it's not just us. I mean, and we need to work with our partners, because it's every
Well,
other
do
urban
you want us
municipality. I mean,
to pursue a legal angle if one is available? To ask for a stay?
by ourselves or in
Well,
conjunction
I would think we
with.
would want Barbara to recruit other city attorneys to say,
Yeah.
you know, is there a legal angle here?
Well, I would think we need to evaluate that strategy. I
Yeah.
mean, we're looking at grasping at straws here, what we can do, and I would think we should evaluate that strategy.
Well,
and
the
whether-
minimum 6 months would at least give us some time to do this in a lot
Yeah,
more.
but they said no, you know.
We're going to mess it up if you do
They
it in a week.
said no, but maybe a lawsuit would get their attention.
It's going to be
Yeah.
messy. To do it in a week is unreasonable. It's messy. It's how mistakes happen.
Right. It'll be cut and fit.
Mr. Leo just mentioned that he was met with the league today, I don't know, on this issue.
Did you want to come up and add to this conversation, Mr. Leo? Nature hates a vacuum. We were supposed to be done at 6:20.
Funny you should mention building codes. For the record, Greg Leo, I'm your lobbyist, the Leo Company. Building codes have been a topic all throughout the last long session and will be a topic in the short session. At the League's lobbying meeting today with the League staff and all the contract lobbyists, we identified that the third-party building inspector issue is the one issue they are focused on. So they are not focused on this code issue. I have to say that there's been discussions about this, but nobody has hoisted the red flag yet. So it's good that we are now hearing this because the rest of the city, the LOC staff and the lobby can deal with this problem in talking with Mark Long administratively and then in talking to the legislators about it. So it's good to hear. Now, we did touch on it at the staff legislative review last week, and essentially many of these changes are being driven by the housing issue. So remember, there's a suite of bills that the speaker has been pushing in order to get more housing on the market. One of the pervasive things you hear from home builders and others in the Capitol is that this is administratively difficult because of building codes. Oh, building codes are hard to get. And that may be true in some places, but not Wilsonville. So I think it's more, they're trying to address more of a systemic problem.
So we're thinking that by removing stuff from the building code and putting it on local cities is going to improve their timeliness?
Different cities have different capacities. You know, smaller cities that use third-party building inspectors, you know, don't really have a great track record of getting things done like our city does. So I think our city represents best practice. I mean, we have we do a lot of building and we frankly do it well. So other places I think look at us as kind of what the model is. So this whole issue is evolving, but think of this in the context of the whole housing issue, that what the legislature is trying to do is build more housing in many ways to meet the lack of housing in the state.
But that doesn't sound like what was the impetus for this change. It sounds like somebody made an interpretation administratively, legally, that this had nothing to do with that.
Yeah, I think they turned to Mark Long, who is a very experienced administrator in the Commerce Department first and now as the building codes administrator, and asked him, well, how would you address it? Well, we've got some old code and we're gonna try to bring it up to speed. So I think what we do legislatively here is make it a higher priority. I take it back to the League lobbying staff. We say our council is very concerned about it. We want to make it a higher priority and get some guidance on what you see statutorily needs to change to get on this.
But it sounds like we will not have a unanimous opinion across the state, especially the kind of urban-rural divide may kind of outline, you know, where people see this as net positive and where people see it as net negative.
Well, that might be why LOC didn't weigh in.
It's very different in a smaller city, say in the frontier counties or even down the valley, where they don't have a full-time professional, you know, building inspection staff like we have. I mean, we have, you know, a very good building inspection process here. Many cities would like to have what we have, but don't have the resources and frankly don't have enough building in order to hire up what they need. So I think what the state is trying to do here is, you know, find ways to expedite bringing housing to market. And this is just one of the levers they decided to pull. In terms of our interests here, we need to look at best practice and say if this is the wrong approach, if this in fact makes it less uniform statewide, then we ought to say that in testimony and in rallying, you know, other people to that message.
Well, just the execution was poor.
Pointing out unintended consequences and additional costs, additional difficulties that go directly to creating more efficient construction.
Correct.
Timetables and costs and things.
That's what we need. Government doesn't always do the right thing. It just sometimes does something in pursuit of the right thing. So we got to make sure we're doing the right thing.
We also need, in my view, to have our lobbyists working to identify those entities that would appear to be looking at it the same way we look at it and try to understand where the opposition is that is looking at it differently and will not want to.
So we look forward to working with you and also the building inspectors statewide. I would submit here for the record tonight the LOC preliminary 2040 priorities, so you can see what the League is actually looking at.
2040?
I'm sorry, 2020.
Oh, I was gonna say, wow, they're looking that far out. That would be a first.
No, we're talking about February here.
So this issue we're talking about now is or is not on their priority list?
This issue is not. Third-party building inspections is.
Well,
So this issue needs to be raised in terms of being a higher priority.
I mean, I would, as this a recommendation, have maybe Barbara and Amanda reach out to their peers in the metro area. I don't know if you guys have a listserv of city attorneys, but.
We do.
Is anybody else tracking this? You know, would it make some sense for us to join together to maybe file some kind of a stay or something? I don't know if that's even possible, but at least give us some time to think through all the ramifications here and be a little more thoughtful in terms of what we're trying to do with our code updates.
So building officials in those other cities may not have been as proactive as our building official at bringing this directly to council and starting to create some understanding. So when we go to those other cities, you know, we may have to hold a seminar impromptu with our associates to kind of get all on the same page.
Absolutely, and that's a good part of the story. The fact we have the building, you know, officials from all over the state here in Wilsonville last Friday, right, talking about this. We're kind of, we're educating other cities on this issue.
Dan, did you get the sense that those other building officials have raised any kind of alert levels with their city attorneys or city managers?
Everybody is super frustrated with this, as Amanda alluded to. Literally, there were probably a half a dozen building officials that asked the same question in a different way of the state building codes manager that was here presenting on this topic. And the answer was the same every time. And it was a skirting of the answer, getting at the two words that are listed in the interpretation of those words. And the question was simply, do you have some sort of written directive from the state AG's office that you could share with the rest of us that would help us to inform our councils and our boards and commissions so that we then could you know, go through and be successful at this before January 1st. So it was, that was the basis of the conversation, and we got nowhere. It was like beating your head against the wall. So.
I think Greg is correct, though. I think this probably is tied to getting housing on the market faster, because one of the things they also had in the last session was what cities can and cannot do as in terms of issuing temporary occupancy permits or holding them up.
Right.
And so I think this is to take away some of the things where the builders aren't finished with certain things or haven't done certain things, and it's slowing their process down. So it could have come from that, but I can also try and call Mark Long.
That seems like a really...
See if I can get more details from him.
That doesn't seem right. If you're trying to expedite building permits, the way to do that would be to say, we're no longer regulating any of this, and neither are you people.
Right.
It wouldn't be saying, here, have your own set of rules, and every builder that's developing in the metro area will have to deal with 21 different codes. That seems antithetical to
It's
common
like
sense.
the whole nother layer of government to have to sift through
every
is like
builder-
not making anything quick. It's more bureaucracy.
Every builder has, you know, a bunch of subs, and what your electrical sub and your
Yeah.
plumbing sub, they're going to have to go to, and they're working on jobs in multiple jurisdictions, and they're going to have to be figuring it out.
Now,
They're going to have to, every sub is going to have to hire a code reader to,
So
And now you just increase housing.
For a retaining
Now the
wall
cost of
in
housing
Oregon
just went up
City, but You
again.
don't need one for Tualatin.
Right.
And you need a permit to build a fence in Wilsonville, but
Right.
not in Portland. I mean.
Well, and even
doesn't make any
in,
sense.
I think it's in chapter 1 where they say that like an unoccupied building is considered unsafe, but they don't regulate dangerous buildings anymore. So what does that even mean?
What about like
you know?
our pump houses?
Right.
Where people have to go in there to maintain them, they're not occupying them. They're not
Aren't they
living
all
in
for
them.
people though? It's all for people. It's not,
We don't need any building code standards for those?
And to
it's not
that,
the zoo. I mean, it's all for people.
those are exactly things that you want to have building codes regulate from a seismic perspective.
You would think.
Right.
Because after
Fire,
a
life, and
seismic
safety
event,
and-
you want those things functional.
Yeah.
And
All right.
one thing, if this is kind of tied to the whole housing, the changes with the housing laws, is the residential specialty code comes up about 18 months from now to be revised by the building codes division, so we'll have to keep an eye out for that.
So can we ask for a little more notice than 2 weeks before it changes so that we can
We can
That would be
definitely
nice.
ask
Maybe
for it.
just as a,
All right, so
talk to Mr. Long tomorrow, maybe ask for a little more time in the future.
We're talking about pursuing a legal coordination strategy.
Well, I'm recommending that we direct our legal staff to see if there's any kind of impetus from other city attorneys to maybe file some kind of, I don't even know what that would look like. Can you sue the state for administrative rules that we haven't been given proper
I
notice
mean, there is
on?
rulemaking process if we can find an angle to say that they didn't follow it.
That's just my recommendation, but you don't have to accept it.
Yeah, well, we need
It's up
to
you.
understand what that path looks like, and it's, some coordination with other municipalities would give us some idea about whether there's mileage to be pursued there. It seems like the building code, the administrative, side coordinating with other cities, is sort of the second leg, and then the third leg is kind of the legislative, is there consensus on a legislative basis, to try to prepare something for February to
Work with our coalition.
coalesce around, right?
In your discussions with Rep. Neron,
mayor.
did she suggest any, would it just be reinstating or reimagining that language to be what we thought it was for the last 18 years? Something like that? Something
It could be
simple?
something very simple.
Okay.
I mean, there's an awful lot of wording in that ORS. An awful lot of wording.
Yeah.
And again, here's, why we need to have the amount of words there to describe what we're trying to do in adopting a statewide building code, I don't know.
Well, look at how many times this has been amended. I mean, this is a patchwork of statutes that's evolved over time. I mean, that could definitely be streamlined, rewritten, made simpler.
I mean, dams and levees are on that list,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it's possible that Polk County won't have any standards for a dam or a levee that's built? And Multnomah County would, because it's an urban county?
Yeah. Well, and some of these items, to be fair, are probably not going to be regulated under the building code anyway. For example, public utility towers and poles. So we have those in Wilsonville, the BPA towers. We don't regulate those.
So strip them out.
So why have it even in there as something that a building official or a design professional on either side of the counter would maybe have confusion about? So that makes some sense. It's just some of the other things that really get my attention are like dangerous buildings. I've had a lot of experience dealing with illegal occupancy, dangerous buildings, tenant issues, particularly in a university town where that's prolific. And even here, we've had some issues with rats and with other fun, instances that I've personally been involved in. So we definitely need standards for this.
Okay.
I look forward to more discussion on this. And
Yeah.
Thank you.
We just didn't want you to get bored in your jobs and not have anything to do,
Good chance of that. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you all. Let's call adjournment at 6:55.
Just two quick items before you
Oh,
adjourn,
okay,
Mayor?
before we go?
Yeah, I mean, we have 5 minutes, so might as well use it. Any questions on the incident that we had? I think you all know how it turned out that they caught the individual who committed that act. We had Public Works and SMART that both helped with the first responders. So I don't know if you have any questions on that one.
Hard to know what else a municipality can do. in that kind of
I just had a call about behavioral health assistance, and I guess that's through the county, so, and
They were on scene.
that they were on scene, and they
Yes.
said that the sheriff's department was very good about getting the right people there because it was a traumatic event for a lot of employees.
The question that has to creep into my mind is, another case of were there signs in advance that could have been followed up from a mental health standpoint that somebody might have been able to intervene, to assist, to do, there's no answer to that. And yet it's the same scenario we've seen in outbreaks across the country where you have a disturbed individual that has, access to firearms and
I
is.
think they're still doing an investigation. I mean, the public reporting is it was an employee that was fired and came back and exacted revenge on the person.
Most people that get fired don't go down that road.
No.
I still think there's a mental health issue.
And that's But if you decide that this employee is dysfunctional and not, we can't keep them on for
Right.
whatever reason, then you let them go, but now they have even less support. But if you're trying to run a business, your business
Right.
isn't
Yeah.
Right,
taking care
so
of.
again, what are the mental health
There's
resources
nowhere to go.
available in our society, in our community, in our county, and do people that recognize a need for an individual in a difficult situation, do they have a way of connecting them with resources when they are needed quickly? I mean, and so a
No,
person that.
we don't have that.
We don't. I mean, that's the point. We don't really seem to have that available, and it just makes me wonder if you could you engage somebody to have a discussion? If you had an individual that might, I mean, I'm imagining here, I don't know, but there might well have been signs, which was why he was let go before. I mean,
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the particulars on that. The other thing I wanted to kind of bring up to date on is the street sweeping contract, which I think expires at the end of this month. We had a RFP on the street. We had one response, and it's double the amount that we're currently paying. And what's driving that is this DEQ rule in terms of what they do with the stuff that they collect. So it's that temporary storage between taking it to the landfill and where you store it temporarily. So
Was there
we
some?
may not have street sweeping here, or we may have to pay double
yeah,
the
well,
amount and do a budget
Here
adjustment.
again, having the digester would have been a really good thing to have if you could run plant material through the digester. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know that would have worked.
So what about?
What are we mostly sweeping up?
Yeah,
Well,
was
it's all the stuff you collect up the street. Well,
Leaves, but isn't about half of
cigarette
it?
butts?
some of it's contaminated with antifreeze and oil and. so it's
Street stuff.
Street stuff,
stuff.
yeah.
And
Metal.
rocks and stuff.
Metal and, yeah,
Was it?
plastic.
Gravel.
Was there some giant contamination that happened that they had to pass this new thing, or?
I think it's a
Or is this-
DEQ, another administrative rule that they don't consult with us on before they.
It may also have been a rule that has been in place for a while, and it just hasn't been.
Yeah, I don't know the
Okay.
background on that. I just know that it's impacting.
So what are we going to do?
Well, I have Delora working up options for me, including what would a street sweeper with 2 employees and 2 street
Yeah.
sweepers working full-time.
Right. Of course, we'd have to store stuff somewhere also.
That's the problem, yeah. We would have to deal with the same issues that the company that's providing that service for us now. So I don't have a lot of good news for you on this one, just that it's a moving target right now, but I'll keep you up to speed as information comes in.
It's not my favorite work session.
Is it?
It's not.
Oh, okay.
That's a lot of bad news. Yeah.
All right,
Sorry.
let's be adjourned at 7 o'clock then. We're due downstairs.
All right.